My son forgot to hang up the phone after our conversation. I heard him laughing with his wife. He's too blind to notice and too stupid to understand. These words hit me like a slap in the face. I quietly hung up the phone myself and went to the bank. A month later, I handed him the lawsuit and said, "Let's meet in court." He was scared because he knew it was his end, but he didn't realize that my plan was just beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Thanks for the help, Dad. I'll pay you back next month, I promise. Patrick's voice carried that familiar strain I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Another emergency. Another bill he couldn't cover on his bartender's salary. Don't worry about it, son. Family helps family. I meant it, just like I'd meant it the dozens of times before. The phone felt warm against my ear as I leaned back in my kitchen chair, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the curtains. All right, well, I gotta go. Love you, Dad. Love you too, Patrick. I waited for the familiar click, but it never came. Instead, I heard the soft thud of the phone being set down, followed by footsteps moving away. Patrick had forgotten to hang up. I was about to end the call myself when I heard Megan's voice, sharp and curious. Did he notice the card withdrawals this time? My hand froze on the phone. Card withdrawals? Patrick's laugh echoed through the speaker, cold and mocking. He's too blind to notice that, and too dumb to figure it out, even if he did. The words hit me like a physical blow. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. How much did you take this week? Megan's voice again, casual as discussing the weather. $3,000. Easy money. The old man's pin was pathetic to guess. Who uses their wedding date? Patrick's voice grew distant as he moved around their apartment. He's been such a sucker all these years. I felt something cold settle in my chest. My wedding date. The date I'd married Patrick's mother, Sarah. The date I'd shared with him when he was 12, telling him how it was the happiest day of my life. Quietly, carefully, I hung up the phone. My hands shook as I opened my banking app. There it was, clear as day. ATM withdrawal, $3,000. 3 days ago, another $2,500. Last week, $4,000. The pattern stretched back months, maybe longer. How had I been so blind? I scrolled through transaction after transaction, each one a knife twist. The money I'd worked 40 years to save. The nest egg I'd built by skipping vacations. Buying generic groceries. Driving the same car for 15 years. All to make sure Patrick had what he needed. College tuition after Sarah died. Help with his wedding. Down payment assistance for their apartment. I remembered sitting in my empty house after Sarah's funeral, staring at Patrick's acceptance letter to Ohio State. The tuition was $28,000 a year. I'd liquidated half my retirement account without hesitation. For Patrick's future, I'd told myself, Sarah would want this. Now I sat in that same kitchen, staring at my phone screen, watching my life's work disappear $3,000 at a time. My chest burned with something I hadn't felt in years. Not the grief that had consumed me after Sarah's death, not the loneliness of widowhood. This was pure, crystalline rage. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Across the street, my neighbor was mowing his lawn, the normal sounds of suburban evening continuing as if my world hadn't just shattered. Patrick thought I was too blind to notice, too dumb to figure it out. I stared at my reflection in the window glass. 65 years old, gray-haired, wearing the same comfortable cardigan I'd had for a decade. Maybe I did look like an easy mark. Maybe I had been one, but not anymore. I picked up the phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found what I was looking for. Tomorrow I'd need answers. I'd need to know exactly how my son had gotten my PIN, how long this had been going on, and most importantly, how to make sure it never happened again. The plan was already forming in my mind as I sat there in the growing darkness. Patrick thought he was so clever, so much smarter than his old man. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The morning coffee tasted bitter, but it sharpened my focus. I'd spent the night planning, and now I needed information. Changing my PIN immediately would tip Patrick off that I knew about the thefts, and I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. First, I needed to understand exactly how he'd figured out my code. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would help me blend in at my destination. The Lucky Strike Tavern sat in downtown Columbus, a dimly lit establishment where Patrick's best friend Brendan worked behind the bar. If anyone knew the details of Patrick's scheme, it would be him. The drive took 20 minutes through familiar streets. I'd lived in this city my entire adult life, raised Patrick here, buried Sarah in Greenlawn Cemetery, just 10 miles from where I now parked. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to use those same familiar places to investigate my own son. The tavern's neon sign flickered like a faulty heartbeat. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of fried food and stale beer. It was barely noon, but a handful of regulars already occupied stools at the long wooden bar. I chose a spot at the far end, away from the others. Brendan looked up from washing glasses, his face brightening with recognition. "Mr. White, haven't seen you in here for ages. How are you doing?" "Getting by, Brendan. Just thought I'd stop in for a quick drink." I settled onto the stool, making myself comfortable. "Bourbon neat," he poured with practiced efficiency, the amber liquid catching the light from the mirror behind the bar. "Patrick mentioned you've been helping them out a lot lately. That's really generous of you." "Family's important." I took a sip, letting the burn settle in my throat. "Speaking of which, how's Patrick handling his finances these days? He seems less stressed about money lately." Brendan's expression shifted slightly, a hint of something that might have been discomfort. "Yeah, he's been more relaxed about that stuff. Says he figured out a system." "A system?" I kept my voice casual, mildly curious. "Sounds like Patrick. Always was clever with numbers. Well, you know how it is with bank stuff." Brendan wiped down the bar with unnecessary vigor. "People find ways to make things work." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between you and me, I've been having trouble with my own banking lately. Keep forgetting my PIN. How do you young folks remember all these numbers?" Brendan relaxed, apparently relieved to move to safer ground. "Oh man, that's the worst. I use my birthday, but Patrick always said that was too obvious. He uses dates that mean something to him, you know? Like, he told me he cracked his dad's PIN by trying important family dates." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. "Smart thinking. What kind of dates?" "Well, he said he tried your birthday first, then his mom's, then—" Brendan paused, realizing he might be sharing too much. "I probably shouldn't be talking about this stuff." "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm just impressed he remembered all those dates." I raised my glass in a mock toast. "To good memories." The memory hit me like a physical blow. Patrick at 12 years old, sitting on our back porch after Sarah's funeral, tears streaming down his face. "Tell me about the day you married Mom," he'd whispered. "Tell me about when you were happy." I'd sat beside him, my own grief raw and overwhelming, and told him everything. How Sarah had looked walking down the aisle. How my hands had shaken when I slipped the ring on her finger. How we'd danced to "At Last" as husband and wife. March 15th, 1982. The date I'd entered as my PIN 15 years later when the bank required a 4-digit PIN. "Yeah," Brendan continued, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "He said it was your wedding anniversary. Pretty romantic that you still use that as your PIN after all these years." I finished my bourbon in one burning gulp. "Well, you know what they say about old habits." I placed a 20 on the bar. "Keep the change, Brendan, and maybe let's keep this conversation between us. Patrick might be embarrassed that he's been talking about family finances." "Of course, Mr. White. No problem at all." I walked out of the tavern on unsteady legs, the spring air hitting my face like a slap. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white again. The wedding date. My most precious memory had become the key to my son's betrayal. I started the engine and pulled into traffic, heading toward Patrick's apartment. It was time for a conversation, but not the kind he was expecting. As I drove through the familiar streets, I found myself rehearsing the words I'd say when I knocked on his door. Patrick thought he was so clever, using my love for his mother against me. He was about to discover that some memories were worth fighting for. The steering wheel bit into my palms as I pulled up to Patrick's house. Brendan's words echoed in my head. "He said it was your wedding anniversary." The modest duplex sat before me, its overgrown lawn a stark contrast to my meticulously maintained yard. "I'd helped with the down payment on this place 3 years ago." I knocked firmly. 3 measured raps. Patrick opened the door in sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, his hair disheveled like he'd just woken up at 2 in the afternoon. His face shifted from confusion to forced brightness. Dad, what are you doing here? I know everything. The words came out steady, controlled. Return my money. His mouth opened, then closed. What money? Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled the folded bank statements from my jacket pocket, the paper crackling like accusations. These withdrawals, my PIN, my wedding date. The color drained from his face. He stepped back, leaving the door open between us like a shield. That's impossible. I would never... March 15th, 1982. I read the numbers aloud like an indictment. The date I married your mother. The date you've been using to steal from me. Who told you that? His voice cracked, the pretense crumbling. Does it matter? I stepped inside without invitation, scanning the living room. New furniture, a massive television mounted on the wall. All purchased with my money, my memories. Patrick's jaw tightened. Fine. Yes, I took some money. But it's not stealing when it's family. Some money? I unfolded the statements completely. $37,000 over 8 months. Megan appeared from the kitchen, her voice sharp as a blade. Patrick, what's going on? Your father-in-law knows about our PIN arrangement. Arrangement? The word tasted bitter. Is that what we're calling theft now? Megan crossed her arms, her stance defiant. You have more money than you know what to do with, sitting alone in that big house. At least Patrick put it to good use. The memory hit me without warning. Patrick's wedding day, 4 years ago. I'd stood at the reception, watching him dance with Megan, remembering my own first dance with Sarah. Later that night, I'd written them a check for $10,000 as a wedding gift. Money I'd saved by eating dinner alone, night after night, in a house that felt too quiet without Sarah's laughter. Good use? I looked around the room again. Like that television? Those leather chairs. Patrick's shoulders squared, defiance replacing shame. You should be grateful it was me and not some stranger. At least the money stayed in the family. Grateful? I repeated the word like I was tasting something rotten. Look, Dad, you're getting worked up over nothing. It's not like you need the money. What are you going to do with it anyway? Buy another cardigan? Megan laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the tension. He probably doesn't even remember giving us that PIN in the first place. I hadn't given them anything. The PIN was private, sacred. It represented the only day in my life when everything had been perfect, when Sarah had walked toward me in white lace and promised forever. They'd taken that memory and turned it into a tool for theft. I want every penny back. My voice stayed level, controlled. By next week, Patrick scoffed. Or what? You'll call the police on your own son. The challenge hung in the air between us. I folded the bank statements carefully, deliberately, tucking them back into my pocket. We'll see. I turned toward the door, each step measured and purposeful. Behind me, I heard Megan whisper something sharp to Patrick, heard his muttered response. The door closed with a definitive click. In my car, I sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The engine hummed as I pulled away from the curb, thoughts churning like storm clouds. Patrick thought this was over. He thought I'd slink home, defeated and embarrassed, like some doddering old fool who'd been taught his place. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The door closed behind me, the quiet house amplifying the echo of Patrick's defiance. I hung my coat on the familiar hook, the empty hallway stretching before me like a reminder of all the solitary dinners, all the holidays spent alone since Sarah died. I walked to the kitchen and set the kettle on the stove. The withdrawal papers lay spread across the counter, each transaction a small betrayal. Maybe I should just let it go. $37,000 was a lot of money, but I had enough to live comfortably. Maybe Patrick was right. What was I going to do with it anyway? The kettle's whistle pierced the silence. I poured the hot water over a tea bag, watching the amber color bloom through the clear liquid, like spreading regret. But as I stirred, a different memory surfaced. Patrick's sophomore year at Ohio State. He'd called me, panicked, saying he needed $5,000 immediately for books and lab fees. I'd driven to the bank that same day, withdrawn the money from my vacation fund. Sarah and I had been planning a trip to Ireland before she got sick. We never made it. I set down the spoon with more force than necessary. 3 years later, Patrick's car had broken down. Another emergency, another withdrawal from my dwindling retirement savings. Then his wedding, his apartment deposit, his credit card debt from the failed business he'd started and abandoned within 6 months. I walked to the living room, where our family photos lined the mantelpiece. Sarah smiled back at me from our honeymoon picture, her face radiant with joy. Next to it sat Patrick's college graduation photo, the one where he'd thrown his cap in the air while I stood proud in the background. I'd sacrificed everything for that moment. My dreams, my retirement plans, my chance to travel while I was still young enough to enjoy it. All so Patrick could have opportunities I'd never had. You should be grateful it was me and not some stranger. His words replayed in my mind as I traced Sarah's face in the photograph. She'd been the one who insisted we start a college fund when Patrick was born. He deserves every opportunity, she'd said, counting out dollar bills from her teacher's salary. Even then, she'd been thinking of his future. I picked up the wedding photo, feeling the weight of the silver frame. March 15th, 1982. The happiest day of my life, reduced to a 6-digit code for my son's convenience. The anger hit me like a physical force. Not the hot, impulsive rage I'd felt earlier, but something colder, more calculated. I set the photo down carefully, deliberately. Calling the police crossed my mind briefly. Credit card fraud was a felony. But Patrick was right about one thing. I couldn't do that to my own son. However, there were other ways to handle theft, legal ways that didn't involve criminal charges. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step feeling purposeful. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth while staring at my reflection in the mirror. 65 years old, gray-haired, wearing the same comfortable cardigan Patrick had mocked. Maybe I did look like an easy mark, but looks could be deceiving. I turned off the lights and slipped into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening quiet. Normal families finishing normal dinners, normal conversations about normal problems. My problems were far from normal now. As I lay there in the darkness, a plan began to take shape. Not revenge, justice. There was a difference, and I intended to make Patrick understand exactly what that difference was. The digital clock beside my bed glowed red in the darkness. 11:47 p.m. Tomorrow was Friday. The courthouse would be open. I'd need to make some calls, do some research. 40 years as an engineer had taught me the value of preparation and precision. I closed my eyes, but sleep remained elusive. My mind raced with possibilities, strategies, the careful steps I'd need to take. Patrick thought he was smart, thought he'd outsmarted his foolish old father. Tomorrow, I'd begin teaching him just how smart this old man could be. Sunlight filtered through the blinds as I rose, the plan from last night sharp in my mind, like a blueprint finally drawn to scale. I'd slept better than expected, the decision bringing an unexpected peace. By 7 a.m., I was dressed in my best suit, the navy one I'd worn to Sarah's funeral, pressed and dignified. The drive to First National took 15 minutes through quiet morning streets. I parked deliberately close to the entrance, clutching a manila folder thick with printed bank statements, transaction records, and notes I'd compiled during my sleepless hours. The bank lobby buzzed with fluorescent energy, early customers conducting their morning business. I approached the customer service desk where a young woman with carefully styled hair greeted me with practiced enthusiasm. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I need to report unauthorized use of my debit card." I set the folder on her desk with deliberate weight. Multiple withdrawals over several months. Fraud. Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh my. Let me get our security manager for you right away." Within minutes, I sat across from Michael Harrison, a middle-aged man whose tie was slightly askew, despite the early hour. He opened my folder, his expression growing more serious with each page. "Mr. White, these are substantial amounts. You're saying you didn't authorize any of these ATM withdrawals?" "Not a single one." I leaned forward. "Someone has been using my PIN for months. I have reason to believe it's a family member." His pen hovered over a yellow legal pad. "A family member?" "My son has access to my personal information. He knows significant dates in my life." I pointed to the withdrawal pattern. "Notice the amounts never exceed $5,000, staying under reporting thresholds." Harrison nodded grimly. "That's unfortunately common in family fraud cases. We'll need to start an investigation immediately." The memory surfaced without warning. Patrick at 16 asking to borrow my car. I'd handed him the keys along with my wallet, trusting him completely to get gas and return home safely. He'd been responsible then, careful with my trust. "What's your process?" I asked. "We'll pull the security footage from the ATMs used, cross-reference with the timestamps on your statements. If we can identify the person making the withdrawals." He paused delicately. "Will you press charges if it's confirmed to be your son?" The question hung between us like a challenge. "I want my money returned. How that happens depends on how cooperative he chooses to be." Over the next 3 days, I maintained my usual routines while the bank conducted their investigation. I mowed the lawn with mechanical precision, reorganized my workshop, cleaned the gutters that didn't need cleaning. But beneath the ordinary tasks, anticipation hummed, like electricity through power lines. On Wednesday afternoon, Harrison called. "Mr. White, we've reviewed the ATM footage. The person making the withdrawals matches the description you provided of your son. We've contacted him directly to discuss the matter." And he initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the video evidence, Harrison cleared his throat. He became quite agitated, said this was a family matter and the bank had no business interfering. I gripped the phone tighter. "What's your next step?" "We're required to give him an opportunity to explain or make restitution before pursuing formal charges. But Mr. White, I should warn you, he seemed very upset about our involvement." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my reflection in the dark window. The bank had done exactly what I'd hoped. Now Patrick knew his theft had been discovered through official channels, not just his father's suspicions. I spent the evening reviewing my notes, anticipating his response. Patrick had always been impulsive when cornered, quick to lash out rather than accept responsibility. Sarah used to call it his cornered cat behavior, all claws and fury when trapped. As I set down my evening coffee, my phone vibrated insistently on the counter. The screen illuminated with a name I'd been expecting but dreading. Patrick. The device continued its urgent buzzing, demanding attention like an accusation that refused to be ignored. I stared at it for 3 full rings, knowing that whatever came next would determine the course of everything that followed. The insistent ring pulled me from my chair, the screen confirming what I dreaded. I took a measured breath before answering, my voice steady despite the storm I knew was coming. "Hello, Patrick." "What the hell did you do?" His voice exploded through the speaker, raw with fury. "The bank called me. They're accusing me of fraud." I reported unauthorized withdrawals from my account. The bank is doing their job. "Unauthorized? I'm your son. This is family money." I remained silent, letting his words hang in the air like smoke from a dying fire. "Dad, are you there? Say something." "I'm listening." The phone rustled, voices whispering urgently in the background. Then Megan's voice cut through, sharp as broken glass. "Mr. White? This is disgusting behavior. Is this how you show love for your family?" Megan: "No, let me talk." Her voice carried that particular edge she used when she wanted to wound. "Patrick has given you everything, his time, his attention, his respect, and this is how you repay him? By humiliating him with bank investigators?" I'd heard this tone before, last Christmas, when I'd bought Patrick a modest gift instead of the expensive watch he'd hinted about for months. The same wounded indignation, the same twisted logic that made my restraint into cruelty. "I want my money returned," Patrick's voice returned, breathless with rage. "Your money? Dad, you're going to die someday. And who do you think gets everything anyway? I was just getting an advance." "An advance requires permission." "Permission?" He laughed, bitter and harsh. "You want permission? Fine. Here's some permission for you. Stop this investigation, or you're going to regret it." The threat settled between us like ice on water. Regret it how, exactly? "You think you're so smart sitting in that big house all alone. But you need us more than we need you, old man. How often do we visit? How often do we call just to check on you?" Megan's voice chimed in again, syrupy with false concern. "We're all the family you have left, Mr. White. Do you really want to throw that away over money? What would Sarah think?" The mention of my wife's name hit like a physical blow. I closed my eyes, remembering Sarah's gentle voice telling Patrick bedtime stories, her patient hands teaching him to tie his shoes. Sarah would want honesty between family members. "Honesty?" Patrick's voice cracked with disbelief. You want honesty? Here's honest. You're a lonely old man who buys his family's attention with money, and now you're angry because someone finally called you on it. I moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street where normal families lived, normal lives without these conversations. The bank will complete their investigation regardless of what I say now. The process has started. Then stop it. Call them back. I can't do that, Patrick. Can't or won't. Won't. Silence stretched between us, filled with breathing and distant traffic sounds from his end of the line. Fine. His voice dropped to something colder, more calculated. You want to play this game? We'll play. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you've lost. The line went dead. I set the phone down carefully, methodically, like diffusing a bomb. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining control during 20 minutes of concentrated venom. I walked to my desk and pulled out a legal pad, writing down everything I could remember from the conversation. Patrick's threats, Megan's manipulations, their exact words about regret and consequences. If this escalated further, I wanted documentation. The memory surfaced as I wrote, Patrick, at 25, calling me at midnight from a police station. Drunk driving, he'd said, but it was just a misunderstanding. Could I post bail? The officer who'd arrested him had been wrong, he insisted. Everyone was wrong except Patrick. I'd paid the bail, hired a lawyer, watched him walk away without a word of gratitude. Now, 15 years later, the pattern remained unchanged. Everyone was wrong except Patrick. I finished my notes and filed them carefully in the manila folder. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm, but I found myself glancing frequently toward the window. Patrick's threats had been vague but pointed. I'd learned long ago that cornered animals were unpredictable. As I prepared for bed, a distant siren wailed somewhere in the night, growing closer before fading into silence. The sound made me pause at my bedroom window, scanning the empty street below. Everything appeared normal, but something in the darkness felt different, changed. Those 2 days passed in watchful routine. Errands at the grocery store, emails to old colleagues, morning walks around the neighborhood. But beneath the ordinary activities, I felt like prey waiting for the predator to strike. On Thursday morning, the knock shattered the calm. Sharp, authoritative raps that echoed through my quiet house like gunshots. I peered through the living room curtains and saw 2 police cruisers parked in my driveway, their red and blue lights painting my white garage door in alternating colors. 3 officers stood on my porch, one holding an official-looking document. I opened the door with steady hands. Mr. Roger White. That's me. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with steel-gray eyes, unfolded a paper with practiced precision. We have a search warrant for these premises based on an anonymous tip regarding illegal weapon storage. The words hit me like cold water. Weapons? Officer, I've never owned a gun in my life. There's been some mistake. We'll need to conduct a thorough search to verify that, sir. May we come in? I stepped aside, my mind racing. Anonymous tip. The timing was too convenient, too perfectly vindictive. Patrick's voice echoed in my memory. You're going to regret it. Within minutes, my home transformed into chaos. Drawers pulled open, couch cushions overturned, kitchen cabinets emptied onto counters. I followed them from room to room, watching 40 years of careful organization crumble under their methodical invasion. Sir, you'll need to wait outside while we complete the search. On my front lawn, I stood like a defendant in my own life. Neighbors emerged from their houses, phones raised, recording my humiliation for posterity. Mrs. Henderson from next door whispered urgently to her husband, their words lost in the morning air, but their judgment clear. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Patrick's 21st birthday. I'd surprised him with a weekend trip to Chicago, paid for it entirely from money I'd saved by eating lunch at home instead of restaurants. We'd toured the architecture, visited museums, shared deep dish pizza. He'd hugged me at the train station, said it was the best birthday ever. Mr. White? The lead officer reappeared. We've completed our search. No weapons were found on the premises, because I don't own any. The tip mentioned specific locations, basement storage, bedroom closets. We found nothing to substantiate the claim. Her voice carried a note of apology, but her eyes remained professional. We'll file our report accordingly." They departed as efficiently as they'd arrived, leaving behind overturned furniture and violated spaces. I watched their taillights disappear around the corner, then turned back toward my house. The front door stood open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The door clicked shut behind me, the scattered papers crunching under my steps as shock settled into something harder, more focused. Books lay spine up on the floor, their pages splayed like broken wings. Kitchen drawers hung open, their contents spilled across counters in accusatory piles. I walked to my study where the computer still hummed quietly on the desk. The Facebook icon glowed blue in the corner of the screen, a platform I'd avoided for years, preferring phone calls to public declarations. But Patrick's threats had changed the rules. I logged into the account I'd created but never used, my fingers moving slowly across the keyboard. Sarah had set it up for me before she died, insisting I'd want to see photos of future grandchildren. There were no grandchildren now, only betrayal. I navigated to Megan's profile, her smiling face mocking me from a vacation photo I'd unknowingly funded. The latest post was pinned at the top, uploaded 2 hours ago. A video. The search. My humiliation captured in high definition. "Unfortunately, my father-in-law has taken the wrong path," the caption read. "We're heartbroken, but not surprised. Mental decline affects many elderly people, leading to paranoid delusions and accusations against family members. Please keep him in your thoughts and prayers during this difficult time. Family, first." Mental health awareness. The video showed police cars in my driveway, officers carrying boxes, neighbors gathering like vultures. 47 likes, 16 shares, comments flowing like poison. So sad when they get like this. My grandmother did the same thing before we had to move her to assisted living. "You're such a saint for putting up with this, Megan." I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling with rage. The phone rang. My bank. "Mr. White, this is Michael Harrison from Fraud Investigation. I wanted to update you on your case." "What's the status?" "Well, it's taking longer than expected. These family matters are complicated. We've spoken with your son again, and he's maintaining his position that the withdrawals were authorized." "Authorized?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "I told you they weren't." "Yes, but without additional evidence or a criminal complaint, our options are limited. We can freeze the account, but recovering funds already withdrawn," he trailed off diplomatically. "What you're telling me is that you won't help." "We're doing everything we can within our guidelines, Mr. White. Perhaps this is something better resolved within the family." I hung up without another word. The laptop sat closed on my desk, Megan's lies still glowing behind its dark screen. 47 people now believed I was a mentally declining old man making paranoid accusations against my loving family. I opened the laptop again, stared at the post, and made a decision. If they wanted to play in public, we'd play in public. But this time, I'd control the narrative. I pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Not angry words or emotional pleas, but a methodical plan. 40 years as an engineer had taught me that every problem had a solution if you approached it with the right tools and sufficient patience. Patrick thought he was smart. Megan believed she was clever. They were about to discover the difference between cunning and intelligence. The screen dimmed as I pushed back from the desk, but an idea sparked. Time to turn the tables quietly. I'd spent my career solving complex problems by breaking them into manageable components, and this situation was no different. Patrick and Megan had declared war using lies and manipulation. I would respond with truth and evidence. First step, documentation. I downloaded a call recording app onto my phone, the kind divorce lawyers recommend to their clients. Every future conversation with Patrick would be preserved, his words captured for posterity. Second step, professional help. I found Detective Marcus Webb through the yellow pages, his ad promising discreet investigations for sensitive matters. His office occupied the second floor of a shabby building downtown, the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to turn. $37,000 over 8 months, I explained, sliding the bank statements across his cluttered desk. I need to know what they spent it on. Webb was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with intelligent eyes and hands that moved constantly, adjusting papers, tapping pens, checking his phone. Surveillance isn't cheap, Mr. White. My daily rate is 300 plus expenses. How long would you need? For this amount of theft? 2 weeks should give us a clear picture of their lifestyle. The memory surfaced as I wrote the check. Designing the water treatment facility in 1987, the mayor asking if we could cut corners to save money. Good engineering isn't cheap, I'd told him, but it's cheaper than fixing bad engineering later. The same principle applied now. Within a week, Webb delivered his first report. Patrick and Megan's spending painted a picture of casual extravagance. Designer clothing, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to luxury resorts. The photos showed them laughing over champagne at establishments I'd never heard of, wearing watches that cost more than most people's cars. My money had funded their performance of prosperity. But Webb's most interesting discovery wasn't photographic, it was technological. Your son's been bragging about his inheritance advance on social media, he explained, showing me screenshots from Patrick's Instagram, posted this last week. The image showed Patrick raising a glass in a toast, the caption reading, "To family money, well spent. Some people know how to enjoy life. Living my best life, family wealth." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. He wasn't just stealing from me, he was mocking me publicly while doing it. Third step, the trap. I created a fake email account and sent myself a fabricated bank alert about suspicious activity on my account. Then I called Patrick, my phone quietly recording every word. "Dad, what's wrong? You sound upset." "I just got an alert from the bank. They're flagging unusual withdrawal patterns on my account." Silence. Then, "What kind of patterns?" "Large amounts, always just under $5,000. They want me to come in tomorrow to review the security footage." "Security footage?" His voice cracked slightly. "From the ATMs. They can see who's been using my card." More silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of panic I'd never heard before. "Dad, maybe you should wait. Don't go to the bank tomorrow. Let me call you back." The line went dead. I set the phone down and smiled for the first time in weeks. My engineering days had taught me that pressure reveals structural weaknesses. Patrick had just shown me his. But my plan was just beginning. Webb had given me evidence of their extravagance. My recordings would capture their admissions, and the fake email had confirmed their guilt through panic. Now came the most important component, legal action. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I'd found online earlier that day. "Thompson and Associates. How may I help you?" "I'd like to schedule a consultation. I need to sue my son." The stack of photos aligned neatly in my folder, each image a piece of evidence in the case I was building. Webb's surveillance had been thorough. Patrick and Megan dining at restaurants that charged more for wine than I spent on groceries in a month, shopping at boutiques where a single handbag cost more than my monthly utilities. The law office of Thompson and Associates occupied a renovated Victorian house near downtown, its brass nameplate polished to mirror brightness. Attorney Sarah Thompson was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, but her questions were sharp and focused. "Mr. White, you're certain about proceeding with this? Suing family members creates permanent damage to relationships." The damage was created when my son decided to steal from me. She reviewed my evidence methodically, bank statements, Webb's photographs, the recorded phone conversations where Patrick's guilt leaked through his panic. "This is actually quite strong. The recordings are admissible since you were a party to the conversations, and the financial evidence is clear. What are we looking at for damages?" "Theft of $37,000 plus interest, court costs, and potentially punitive damages for the systematic nature of the fraud." Her pen scratched across legal forms, each stroke sealing my path forward. "I'll file this afternoon." The courthouse clerk stamped my documents with satisfying authority, the official seal marking my transformation from victim to plaintiff. Case number CV 2024-1847, Roger White versus Patrick White and Megan White. I was heading home when my phone rang. "Patrick." I activated the recording app before answering. "Dad, we need to talk. Can you drop this bank thing? We can work something out." "Work what out exactly?" "Look, maybe I did borrow some money without asking, but families don't sue each other over misunderstandings." "Borrowing requires permission, Patrick. Taking without permission is theft." Megan's voice cut through the background. "Tell him we'll pay him back. Slowly, but we'll pay." How slowly? I asked. Maybe $50 a month? 100? We're not rich, Dad. I thought of the photos Webb had taken yesterday. Patrick signing the check at a steakhouse that charged $60 for ribeye. You'll be hearing from my attorney. Your attorney? His voice pitched higher. Dad, you can't be serious about this. I'm your son. And I was your father. Neither fact prevented the theft. We'll fight this. We'll tell everyone you're having mental problems. The police search proves... I hung up, my finger steady on the end call button. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, when Patrick was 12, he'd been caught stealing candy from a corner store. I'd marched him back to apologize and paid double the candy's value. Taking what isn't yours is wrong, I told him, no matter what excuse you use. He'd learned the lesson then. Apparently, he'd forgotten it since. That evening, I sat in my study reviewing the legal papers Sarah Thompson had prepared. The complaint laid out the facts in cold, precise language. Systematic theft, abuse of trust, fraudulent use of financial information. Reading it felt like watching my family's destruction narrated by a stranger. But some destructions were necessary, like demolishing a building with structural damage. You cleared the bad foundation before constructing something better. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is just the beginning, old man. You have no idea what you've started. I forwarded the text to Thompson with a note. Additional evidence of intimidation. Then I poured myself a glass of the wine Sarah and I had been saving for a special occasion. It had been aging in our basement for 15 years, waiting for the right moment. Tonight felt right. Justice, it turned out, was worth celebrating. That month flew in a blur of rehearsals and legal reviews, meetings with Thompson, practice sessions for testimony, evidence organization, until finally stepping into the echoing courthouse hall. The weight of my carefully compiled evidence anchored me with quiet confidence. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined from television shows, more like a conference room with elevated seating and formal furniture. Patrick and Megan sat at the defendant's table with their court-appointed attorney, a young man who looked overwhelmed by the evidence stacked against his clients. Judge Patricia Reeves called the session to order with a sharp crack of her gavel. This is a civil case of alleged theft and fraud. Mr. White, you may present your evidence. Thompson stood, her voice clear and professional. Your Honor, we'll demonstrate systematic theft totaling $37,000, accomplished through unauthorized use of the plaintiff's personal identification number. The first exhibit was the bank statements, each withdrawal highlighted in yellow marker. As Thompson read the amounts aloud, I watched Patrick's face grow paler with each number. March 3rd, $3,000. March 10th, $2,500. March 17th, $4,000. The list continued for several minutes, a drumbeat of betrayal measured in dollars and dates. Then came Webb's photographs. Patrick and Megan at expensive restaurants, shopping at luxury stores. Patrick wearing a watch that cost more than my car payment. The images projected onto a screen for the judge to examine. These photos were taken during the period of alleged theft, Thompson explained. Note, the defendant's lifestyle appears inconsistent with his reported income as a part-time bartender. But the moment I'd been waiting for came when Thompson activated the recording from my phone. Patrick's voice filled the courtroom, his panic clear as he begged me to avoid the bank's investigation. Dad, maybe you should wait. Don't go to the bank tomorrow. Let me call you back. The recording continued with our later conversation. Look, maybe I did borrow some money without asking. Judge Reeves leaned forward. Did I hear the defendant admit to taking money without permission? Patrick's attorney objected weakly, but the damage was done. Patrick had confessed in his own words. When it was their turn to defend, Patrick took the stand with shaking hands. Your Honor, my father gave me permission to use his account. He's getting older, sometimes forgets things. Do you have any written permission? Thompson asked during cross-examination. Well, no, but... Any witnesses to this alleged permission? It was understood between us. Family doesn't need formal permission for everything. Thompson pulled out the social media screenshots Webb had collected. Is this your Instagram post, Mr. White? Patrick's face went white as his own words appeared on the screen. To family money, well spent. Some people know how to enjoy life. Does this sound like someone who believed he had permission to use his father's money? That was just joking around. Megan's testimony was even worse. She cried on cue, claiming they'd only taken money for necessities, while photos of their luxury purchases glowed on the courtroom screen behind her. Groceries cost $1,800 at a steakhouse? Thompson asked dryly. The memory hit me as I watched them squirm. The morning I'd overheard Patrick's laughter through the forgotten phone call. He's too blind to notice that, and too dumb to figure it out. The arrogance in his voice, the casual dismissal of my intelligence. Now he sat in a witness chair, stumbling over lies, while evidence of his theft surrounded him like prison walls. Judge Reeves deliberated for less than 10 minutes. I find the evidence overwhelming. The defendants systematically stole from the plaintiff, using personal information obtained through family trust. The theft totaled $37,000 over 8 months, accomplished through deliberate deception. The gavel's strike echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $37,000 in restitution, plus court costs, attorney fees, and a penalty of $10,000 for the systematic nature of the fraud. Total judgment, $52,000. I sat perfectly still, letting the victory settle into my bones like warmth from a long-awaited fire. Patrick and Megan stared at the judge in shock, their faces pale as hospital sheets. $52,000 they didn't have. Judgment they couldn't escape. As we filed out of the courtroom, Patrick caught my arm. "Dad, please. We can't pay this. You're destroying us." I looked into his eyes, my son's eyes, Sarah's eyes, and saw nothing but the frightened calculation of someone whose schemes had finally collapsed. "You destroyed yourselves," I said quietly. "I just provided the evidence." Outside the courthouse, Thompson shook my hand with genuine satisfaction. "Congratulations, Mr. White. Now comes the fun part, collecting what they owe you." I walked to my car with the judgment papers in my briefcase, feeling lighter than I had in months. The spring air carried the scent of flowering trees, and for the first time since that terrible phone call, I could imagine a future without the bitter taste of betrayal. The enforcement notice arrived within a week, its official letterhead announcing the beginning of Patrick and Megan's financial reckoning. My attorney had explained the process: wage garnishment, asset seizure, bank account freezes, the legal machinery that turns court judgments into recovered money. I watched their unraveling from a careful distance. First came Patrick's car. I drove past their apartment complex and saw it parked on the street, with a for sale sign taped to the windshield, its red letters fading like their excuses. The BMW he'd bought with my stolen money, now priced desperately low for quick sale. 2 days later, Webb called with an update. They're liquidating everything they can. Estate sale this weekend. Furniture, electronics, jewelry. Word is they're behind on rent and facing eviction. How much have they raised? Maybe $8,000 so far. They've got a long way to go. The social media posts had stopped completely. Megan's Instagram, once filled with restaurant photos and vacation boasts, now sat silent. Their last public performance had been their courtroom defeat. I received my first payment on a Tuesday, a check for $1,500, drawn on Patrick's checking account with court-ordered payment, written in the memo line. My bank teller processed it without comment, but I caught her glance at the notation. The irony was perfect. Money flowing back to me through the same bank where Patrick had convinced them I was too senile to notice systematic theft. That afternoon, my phone rang. Megan. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mr. White, please, can we talk? We know we made mistakes, but $52,000 will ruin us. Patrick lost his job because his boss found out about the lawsuit. I'm pregnant. Please." Her voice carried genuine desperation now, stripped of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. "Megan, you had months to return what you stole. You chose threats and humiliation instead. But the baby, your grandchild." The words hung between us like bait on a hook. She was trying the same emotional manipulation that had worked for years, assuming I'd sacrificed my dignity for the promise of family peace. Any child deserves parents who understand the difference between right and wrong. Maybe this experience will teach you both that lesson. I hung up and sat quietly in my kitchen, remembering the morning I'd discovered their theft, the shock of betrayal, the humiliation of being called too blind and too dumb to notice my own money disappearing. Now, Patrick worked construction for half his bartender wages, his fancy watch sold to a pawn shop. Megan had moved back with her mother, their apartment lost to missed rent payments. The courthouse judgment had stripped away their stolen prosperity, revealing the emptiness underneath. By summer's end, they'd managed to pay back $23,000 through liquidated assets and garnished wages. The remaining $29,000 would take years to collect, assuming they both stayed employed. I deposited their latest payment, a money order for $800, and drove home through neighborhoods where normal families lived normal lives without these complications. In my driveway, I sat for a moment, looking at the house Sarah and I had built together. 40 years of marriage, 35 years of raising Patrick, 15 years of widowhood. The phone call that started this journey felt like something from another lifetime. But the silence was different now. Not the hollow echo of loneliness, but the satisfied quiet of problems solved and accounts balanced. I walked inside and pulled out my checkbook to update the register. $52,000 awarded, $23,000 collected, $29,000 still owed. The mathematics of justice calculated in dollars and consequences. Sarah's picture smiled at me from the mantelpiece, her face frozen in wedding day joy. I'd honored her memory by refusing to accept theft disguised as family loyalty. She would have approved of the fight, even if she might have grieved the necessity. Outside my window, the neighborhood settled into its evening routine. Normal problems, normal solutions, normal families without these complications. Inside my house, the silence felt like victory. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.